Welcome to the TMRN Time Monk Radio Network. I'm Jules, and tonight we will be discussing comets, asteroids, and precursors to the killshot with remote viewer Kosmo. Kosmo is a professional remote viewer who performs a number of projects with the remote viewers at Ed Dame's website, learnrv.com. Kosmo's website is Kocmodpom.com, and I'll spell that Kocmodpom.com. Kosmo, welcome to Time Monk Radio.
Hi, Jules. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. The Time Monk Radio producer is Fox, and today he'll be doing the recording and technical support for the show. Several members of the forum were kind enough to join us tonight. They include members Plain and Mash. This interview will be available on Time Monk Radio and shortly after on the Time Monk Radio YouTube channel. Kosmo, the reason is basically with the year of the comet. So many comets, asteroids, and meteors currently passing near or even hitting Earth, as the one in Russia did this year. I came across your project, Operation to be named later, and that's kind of sparked my interest, and that's why you're on the show with us. Could you elaborate or explain the genesis or why you had this project and what was the reason for it?
Sure. Well, I guess the easiest way to explain it would kind of give some background on my training and how I kind of evolved as a viewer. I started back in 2004 attending some of the Major Dame's workshops. Was trained by him, and as anyone knows who's been associated with him, he's been talking about a killshot or a solar event that was going to affect Earth roughly since, I believe, about 2003. And as a viewer, you kind of get interested. You kind of see some shortfalls and advantages of remote viewing. And one of the big things that you have when you do a remote viewing session is you don't have really a good sense of scale or magnitude of what you're viewing. It's very hard to distinguish just from, say, sketches alone, the difference between a subatomic particle or a planet or a supernova. So those sorts of things have to be fleshed out with additional data, but still sometimes it can be left up to interpretation because everything's relative. So the first thing that we wanted to do was actually try and verify whether this was going to be as big as we were led to believe. I'm kind of an engineer by background. Not kind of am, but so the first step was to go through that validation itself. And so a few years ago on the forums, another viewer, Michael Ruiz, put together a project. And it was Project Noodle, and it's still up. And basically he devised a cube, which was planet Earth's next global natural catastrophe - cataclysm. So you kind of see what the next really big thing was, right? Global being not a regional problem like a hurricane or something like that, but just on a massive scale of catastrophe. And from that session work, we were able to more or less verify most of the issues that the Major was talking about. So he seemed to be kind of right on in that regard. There was definitely a presence of planetary objects, a solar body, and things coming off of the larger object and impinging upon the second object. So with that in mind, I guess I'm just curious, and it still was interesting to me to see, okay, so it is global, but what does that actually mean? And try and put some better qualifiers on the results, or see if you actually could obtain them, and would they align to say, yeah, this is really going to be a big deal or not. So I tackled a couple other projects, like a preceding event for this, and not a whole lot. I mean, it was interesting data, but not a whole lot came out of it. But back in the original session for this planetary catastrophe, one of the archetypes seemed to indicate a space body. Now, immediately, a few people wanted to jump to the conclusion that, oh, it's the long lost planet Nibiru, but we'd actually run some other topical search sessions on that separately, and determined that was more or less a hoax, perpetuated by. It looks like there were 3 people involved in total that got that going. So, discluding that, I guess the other thing to really nail the coffin in that monster would be to see how big this object was. So that's really the genesis of Operation to be named later. Even though it's only been posted on the forum since about January 2012, we actually started work on it probably about 6 to 9 months in advance of that, doing an actual acquiring position data for it. It's just when we had a decent amount and were able to kind of see that we had recurring trajectories coming up with the object, that I thought, this might be a good time to put it up on the forum in a public way. And the intent was to actually be able to rent telescope time and actually make a position determination ourselves and actually be able to name the object. For a number of reasons, choice of observatory, weather, position behind the sun, time of year. We had a lot of things conspire against us, and what we really need was a southern observatory, because it did appear that the object was south of the ecliptic plane.
Okay, Kosmo. So just going back to the history. So Project Dingle, was that right? Dingle, was that the correct pronunciation?
I'm sorry, you kind of broke up there.
Yeah, sorry. So the original project, Project Dingle, is that right?
Yes. Correct.
Yep. So that the I guess the marker for that was the next great big global cataclysm or catastrophe. So did that actually result in showing you that it would be the kill shot? It'll be something else just before the kill shot that would be the next Earth global catastrophe?
The data that we got out of that queue, kind of their next global natural catastrophe-cataclysm, did seem to be consistent with the kill shot data that Major James had been talking about.
Okay, great. So yes, so great. That's fantastic. So with that, so you've tried to delve more deeply into it with Operation to be named later. So, what was the goals of that, and what was the what were you trying to achieve then?
Well, as most any remote viewer knows, one of the big issues or hurdles remote viewing has left to solve is the time problem. And there just really isn't a really accurate way to determine when an event is going to happen. You can look at a preceding event, but other than that, you're really just kind of throwing pots at a wall to see if it'll stick. But because we were able to find this, pull this object out of the initial session work and determine that it had a trajectory, then simple orbital mechanics should give you a good estimate on when it's going to arrive. So that was more or less the reasoning for starting Operation to be named later, was catalog this in the hopes of getting discovery credit for the object. So I have an aerospace engineering degree, so I'm quite familiar with orbital mechanics. processes, and so I decided that that would be the best way to go about doing this. So I started doing some estimations after we went and determined size. I will say that obviously I'm just one member of a team. ABAN and Demo, also of the forum, contributed a vast amount of work to this project, and I can say without them there would be no project. So ABAN was actually the first person to do the size determination of the object itself, to see that if it was a planet or something bigger, smaller, or whatever. And the initial estimates looked to be right around the 10 to 20 kilometer size for radius. We were able to confirm that. Demo and I took the initiative, and when we more or less got the same numbers through an independent setup than what he had used, we decided there was something to this, and ran some follow-on work as a project, and more or less were able to determine that the max radius is roughly 11 kilometers. It's 13 kilometers long, and 13 kilometers wide. It's a rough-looking object. It seemed to be arrowhead-shaped, but not too far off from what you might expect from a small asteroid on that size. So once we had those down, it's clearly not a planet, but it must be important because it showed up in the session where it's relating to this catastrophe. How it precipitates the catastrophe, we're not sure. An object of that size could have a number of smaller satellites, and our position data could just be picking up a superposition of the center of mass of all of those objects, the main object that we're getting out of the session, and smaller objects that are rotating around it. So then we went off to work on the orbital characteristics of the object itself, along with, occasionally, like once every 6 months or so, because this is a very work-intensive project, to determine some orbital characteristics. The first one of interest is eccentricity. And now, if you don't know, an eccentricity of 1, which is very close to what Earth has, is roughly a perfect circle. Well, 1 is a perfect circle. Earth is a little under 1, so it's almost a perfect circle. And as you go below that, it becomes more elliptical. And as you go above it, it stretches out into an ellipse until you can have a hyperbolic orbit, which means that it's a one-time event. It's going to come through once. It comes from someplace deep past possibly the Oort cloud, and will not return when it comes back. And so if it was a planet, like a Nibiru, then you would expect something that would have an orbital period of roughly what they're saying, of 3,600 years, or whatever the number is that they're quoting. And our eccentricity number is running around 1,600, which is clearly a one-path object of more or less a straight-in shot towards the center of the solar system, and it will go back out as quickly as it came in, and never to return. So having that, the next couple of interesting data points that we wanted to determine were perigee and perihelion. Perihelion is the closest approach of an object to the sun, and perigee is the closest approach of an object to Earth. So when we were initially doing the work, it was way too far out, even with a professional scope, unless you had something very large, well over 500 millimeters, to see, until probably about 6 months to a year ago. That's when it should have been visible there. We know it's not a comet because once it crossed inside of Jupiter's orbit, it should have started to brighten in intensity. And the fact that no one has, well, that we know of, has seemed to have found this yet, it doesn't seem to match any of the other orbital diagrams of pan stars or ISON or any other known comets. They just seem to be completely independent of those. So determining perihelion perigee would be very good to know what's going to actually happen with the object. Is it going to affect Earth or not? Our initial determinations showed a perigee, that's closest approach to Earth, of around 0.05 AUs. For comparison, Earth to Moon distance is 0.0024. So it is an object that seems like it would be passing well within the boundary between Earth and Moon. We've had a number of asteroids actually do that recently, and it hasn't been a big deal. They just go with and by. But like I said, because of the size of this object, there could be other satellites orbiting around it, and those certainly could be within the error bar of actually impinging upon the atmosphere. Whether they burn up, we don't know. That's just speculation. So it's going to be close. The other factor determined was perihelion. Perihelion, again, being the closest approach to the sun. Now, there are some comets, I don't remember if Pan-STARRS was or if ISON was supposed to be. One of those is supposed to be a sun grazer, meaning it's going to get so close to the sun that it's actually going to shatter, break apart, spread out, and be, much more dangerous than if it hadn't done that. So that was kind of an important determination. Our first iteration was 0.3 AU, which is roughly the orbit of Mercury. We had a second iteration that showed much closer, but we haven't been able to confirm that one. That one would classify it as a sun grazer and thus break apart, and could explain why it might be a factor for Earth on the backside through. Just the way the planets are currently set up, it was definitely going to be approaching Earth from the far side of the sun, rather than coming straight in and approaching Earth directly. So if it was the other way around, then we would know, we would get a number for perihelion roughly on par with, some other planetary orbit. Right, we'd be able to exclude crossing the orbit of Mercury, but that hasn't happened. I sent you guys a few images of the tracking relative on the ecliptic plane. The point is now at this point to kind of release that information so that other astronomers may be able to point to that general direction in the sky and hopefully find it rather quickly.
Sure. Yeah, we got that, Kosmo. Just before we go on to the specifics of this object, I think Mash had some questions on the way the experiment or the project was set up, the tasking and stuff. So Mash, you had some questions on that?
Yeah. Sure. Go ahead.
Oh, please continue.
Okay. So what I'm curious about is exactly how did you go about giving the tasking to the remote viewers, and how many people are doing the remote viewing?
3 for this particular project.
Okay. And how was the tasking set up? And did they know that when they did a session, that it was specifically related to this? or were there just regular everyday targets thrown in there also?
For the non-operation to be named later things, those were all done blind on the forum, and the queue was revealed later. But for the specific parameter estimation work, I guess I would say it's kind of a combination of front-loaded in that you know what the target is, but the way that we set it up eliminates any bias. So basically, it's a blind project within a front-loaded target, right? Because the way that we had it set up, the data that you're going to get for an independent analyst to make a determination on, you don't know what the target is. I hesitate to say too much about how we set them up, but I guess an example would be if you were going to try to solve a hybrid ARV problem.
Okay.
Right? Associative remote viewing, you have 2 photos, 2 envelopes. You certainly agree that you can put photos in the envelopes that you don't know. If you have, say, like I have well over 200 target photo pairs that I use for ARV sessions. So you throw them in, you have no idea what the targets are, even though you know what the target is about, but you don't know what those are in relation to that. And so you run the session, and you are blind. Then you pull them out, you do the analysis. It's much the same thing here. Actually, it's almost exactly the same. So you can know what the subject of the target is, just like for any financial market session that you would run, right? You know that you're targeting the euro US dollar, but you don't know what the photos are, so you don't know what the associations are that are going with long or short. So you are blind, and that's the way this project was run.
All right, so you sort of set up like an ARV type of session or associated remote viewing for the targets.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Just to explain how associated remote viewing works quickly for people who don't know what we're talking about. Okay, I'll do it.
That's probably one of the most difficult questions that anyone could ever ask.
Yeah.
Is how remote viewing works. If I had to kind of do an analogy, it would appear from other session work that the universe is nothing but an information pattern. Well, I mean, it's not nothing but an information, but there is information seems to be an inherent property of all matter. And you, as the observer, are able to access that anywhere, anytime, any place. And the process of remote viewing is actually accessing those information patterns and reconstructing them.
Okay.
That's more or less how remote viewing works.
Now, quick question. You said you trained with Ed Dames. Did he at any point cover what's called the rubber band effect when doing a remote viewing session? And especially,
I'm sorry?
The rubber band effect, especially when trying to do a stage 6 scale or determining size or anything like that?
I'm not familiar at all with the rubber band effect.
Okay.
I will say that any of the size determination stuff was not done in S6. They were S8 analytics.
Okay.
Through association, so that they were blind, and the results pointed clearly towards a certain number, and you refine that number until you had it pinned down, more or less a bracketing effect.
Okay.
So I'm not sure what rubber band is, but I'd love to hear it if you
basically, what it means is basically when you're doing a session, if you ask a child to draw a 3-year-old child to draw a picture of a person, they may draw the head bigger, or they may draw a certain body part that's important to them bigger than everything else. Or you draw a picture of the world, they'll draw their own country or what's of interest to them larger. So basically, in a remote viewing session, the subconscious normally makes things that are of interest to it larger than everything else. So you have to keep that in mind when you're doing graphs and scales and something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was actually one of the initial drivers for doing the project itself is just what you said. In a session, it's really hard to determine the magnitude or scale. But we took a numeric approach. I know some people may say that that's just not possible, but I'll tell you it is. And that's what we've done. The methods have been verified through financial markets projections in the past, where it's been able to call tops and bottoms of certain assets within some cases as close as 0.25% of the minimum value. It was that close. That was the margin of error. And we used the exact same techniques from that to determine the size. So I don't think there's any doubt of the size or magnitude of these determinations, though eccentricity is a little fuzzy when it gets out into that large scale. So we weren't able to hone in to that number as well. So of all of them, I would say that's the most sketchy, just because once we saw it was that big, there's really no point in going further along for determination.
Right.
There's not really a whole lot of difference between a eccentricity of 1,600 and 16,000.
Now, where you're determining the path, was that like based on a present time or a fixed date in the future or the past?
Well, because time can't really be determined, they were done at a position of now. So there was a couple days of intense session work to determine where the object was at any one time. And, just because of the massive scale that we were talking about, any movement over that or even a week is really going to be imperceptible at a high level like we were looking at across the solar system. So it's as good as a static approximation at that point.
Okay. Those are my questions. I'll let somebody else ask a few now.
Yeah, thanks, Mash. With this object, I did see here that there's a potential for it to possibly break up. First of all, its positioning at this stage, how close is it to perigee? I mean, is it close to Earth now, or what's the location of it now, Kosmo?
The previous data iteration was showing the object just crossing the far side of Earth's orbit, from the distant side of the sun. And that position that we got, just a level 1 positioning, we just didn't have the time or resources to do a level 2 further refined one, did seem to lend more credence to the perihelion value of 0.3, so roughly pointing towards Mercury's orbit, whereas some of the earlier positioning that were further out in the solar system where there's, a larger magnitude of error, we're looking more or less a little closer than that toward the center, but it was well within the margin of error to hit that 0.3 when it was back out between Saturn and Uranus. So right now, if I had to speculate, I believe it is very close to crossing the orbit of Mercury, if it hasn't already passed Mercury at this point. I kind of expect it to have passed it, and I would, again, if we had more time to find another position determination, I could make a much better estimate of about when there should be a flyby for Earth. But right now, a fair window would seem to be May 15th, June 15th.
Okay,
Whether it
interesting.
directly impacts Earth, well, I don't believe it's going to directly impact Earth. But again, like I said, this is the center of mass value, so there could be other extraneous objects being towed along with it that does have some effect, or maybe it's a geomagnetic effect that causes problems on Earth. We don't know. But we do know that it is tied to that global catastrophe. It's the first of the series of events from the global catastrophe, but as to the specific events of it, that I don't know.
So with the so I guess the original task of Project Dingle was the next global catastrophe. Is that correct? So
yes.
potentially this object could, some of its satellites could hit the Earth, and it could cause citywide destruction, but because of the search terms, it wouldn't fit as a global catastrophe. It could wipe out. It could wipe out a city, or it could wipe out even a half continent. But that would probably not classify as a global catastrophe in terms of the search Dingle? Would that sound correct or not?
I would agree with that assessment.
Okay, so potentially so that's why it's an interesting project actually. So you're looking at around May 15, May 16 as an estimate. You're extrapolating based on what you've got, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So what's your latest information on this? Along with that, so you've obviously in terms of impact, actually. So you've. Is there any new information on this object itself?
That's actually the subject of another project that a few viewers have been tapped blind to, and I'm probably going to spoil the pot by actually saying that, since that work hasn't come in, so it'll probably have to be discarded at this point. But one of the first data points that just came in seemed to indicate chaos, hostility, and anger regarding the dynamics involved on the inner workings of this object. So, and I hesitate to say what the cue is, just in case there is additional work out there that's been done, just hasn't been run yet. But it is it is related to the effects on Earth of the object.
Yeah, the reason this is interesting as well is I'm not sure if you're aware. There's like what I've read is that there's a book of Zohar, and it's predicted. It's been obviously been written for a long time now that apparently there's going to be a comet and a large earthquake on May 16th, 2013. Now I haven't researched it much, but it's interesting that you say that this extrapolated data comet passes around the May 15th, May 16th, and we have this book of Zohar, hundreds of years old, that apparently has this date in there about a big earthquake and comet. Interesting.
May 16th would certainly be on the short side of the estimate for the time arrival, but I certainly can't exclude that.
Could you? You're probably familiar with the project for the Farsight's project, climate change project that they did.
A little bit, yes.
Yeah. So essentially, they, as Mash mentioned earlier, they were using a fixed anchor on a time. So, would you be interested in maybe doing like what am I doing sitting? What would be my conditions in my for me sitting down on May 16th at my location, and then see if would that be a possible way to see if there was any impacts on those dates? Do you do that type of remote viewing?
No, because dates have been horribly problematic. There does seem to be a trend that maybe dates or cylindrical dates are starting to be resolved in the matrix of the search term, but I honestly wouldn't trust that too much. The matrix has too much flexibility in pulling something either before or after a date like that, because what does a date really even mean? It's no different than a human construct like eccentricity, but those tend to be used only in scientific terminology. So it seems to work rather well as a solid base search term to execute. Whereas a cylindrical date, it's there's 24 time zones on Earth, so you automatically have some slop in that itself. And does the matrix actually know which calendar that you're looking at? You may be able to qualify a year. There has been some early research on using a year in a search term, and I believe that wasn't really possible before 2000, because that was such a big, scary event for many people that turned in to be nothing, Y2K. I think that was the delineating moment when a year might be able to be used as a search term. But as for a specific cylindrical date, that is certainly not an approach that I would take. I've actually been doing a lot of thinking on the subject, and I have a potential solution, but I have yet to test it. So I just don't know. But in theory, I should be able to do a determination down to a second with it. But again, hasn't been tested. Maybe my schedule clears up in the next month or so. I'll actually have some preliminary results on that. But right now, I just don't know of a specific way that you can target. However, I will make an exception. One possibility is to target a specific newspaper and on a specific cylindrical date, because as long as that newspaper is published and has that date on it, it's going to serve as a pretty good reference, time reference. That may be possible as a source point for data collection like you're suggesting, in my opinion.
So, in a nutshell, at the moment, you think an object is, passing through the solar system, and it's going to come close to Earth on a certain, a date in May, some point in the future.
May or June.
But May or June, okay.
Well, I guess one thing they have yet to bring up was the population determination.
Yeah.
So again, this goes back to the kill shot kind of being a big fuzzy thing and not knowing the magnitude of the event. And I was brainstorming on what was the best way to actually determine the effects on Earth itself, and if it was going to be a catastrophe. Population seemed like as good an estimate as any. I believe gross domestic product would also be a valuable search term. There are world GDP estimates, so much like a population estimate, you could get a magnitude, a descriptive magnitude of the effects of this catastrophe on Earth by noting the change in GDP levels, just as we've done with population.
What about something like CO2 levels?
I don't know if there's any evidence that CO2 levels are causal or not to anything that people are talking about as far as climate change. So I think that would be very indirect and subject to a lot of baseless speculation.
But I'm not talking about but if, say, you did have a large asteroid hit or something like that, what would be the scientific after effects of that? Would you have a rise in certain levels or something like that?
Okay, I understand that point, but even if you have some really big number, I guess because of my background I don't know how useful that would be to me. Now, if I was a paleogeologist or something that actually could attribute a given CO2 level, say, as a result out of that search that you're suggesting, and cross-reference it to some event that may have happened in Earth's past, that could definitely be a very useful parameter.
Yeah.
So I stand corrected on that.
Okay.
It is kind of an indirect determination. So whereas a population or a GDP is something that, most people have the grasp of GDP, but everyone knows what a number is of population. So that's probably the easiest and least likely to misinterpret. So we did a couple projects on that. The first one was a long-term human population determination for Earth. And the results of that look to be like a number between 2 and 3 billion. Long-term is very, very fuzzy. I believe it to be around 10 to 50 years, but I just don't know for sure. Whereas short-term is a little much more finely resolved to be 12 months. And the short-term losses, although for the short term, it's just the first iteration. We have not made it through to do a more refined confirmation of it, but it looks like 1.5 billion lost. But again, that is a first estimate and needs confirmation. So it could be wildly off. Maybe we just had a bad hair day. But for what it's worth, that is the first determination of a loss on a 12-month time scale.
Is it difficult to? I think so. I believe you're using GDP to estimate the population. Is that correct, Kosmo?
No, this was actually a direct determination of population.
And how did you do that, Kosmo? Like, what were you looking at? The census. How did you remote view the population?
We just like determining a asset's price for a financial market. Population also has value. So there's the search methodology that I use for financial markets applications is directly applicable to determining any value. Kind of the same way that we were able to determine the size of the object, its length and width, the perihelion. Those are all numeric. They're not, right, because they're associative references. So there's a strong association pointing towards a specific number, without giving anything proprietary away. But that's more or less it. It's not that difficult to pull off. It's just a conglomeration of a number of different things that are out there in the remote viewing world. I guess specifically out of the Dames camp, there's been a lot of progress that I haven't seen in other groups. So those form the basis for what we were able to figure out how to determine actual numbers.
And that short term, is that what was the search term for that? That short term population, is that from as of now, or is it as of the first event, or so how did you term that?
Well, short term is a rolling window from whenever you run the session up until about 12 months. It could be a little fuzzier than that. It could be 9 to 15 months, but 12 seems to be about it, between 9 and 12. So basically, you'll just run an anchor session, then you'll go through the essay and analytical work, which is our additional project, right? But the anchor was, if I remember correctly, like planet Earth short-term human population minimum.
I think you did the first iteration on November. Is that right? 2012? Is that correct? For the short term?
Somewhere around there, yeah.
So we add, say, 12 months to that. So we're looking at, probably end of 2013 is when the window finishes. So with possibly by end of this year is when we might get that 1.5 billion drop, if that is correct.
Yeah. If that first iteration on short term is correct, I would say the window for that would close by spring of 2014. That's the latest.
Okay, thank you.
Can you be sure that it's from this future event as opposed to something else, like, for example, radiation from Fukushima?
No, I have no idea, because there's no causality link between the search term that I gave you for that being planet Earth short-term human population minimum. There is no causality link between that and the Earth's next global catastrophe cataclysm. So you're absolutely right. It could be effects from Fukushima for all we know.
And then there's a second question. Professor James McCanney is pretty famous for the comet theory and the electrical effects from a distance. And his current concern is that the powers that be in different countries might essentially use a false flag, a solar flare that isn't really a killer, but they would use it to take the grid down. And if the grid came down, that in and of itself might kill tens of millions worldwide. Any evidence of that, or could you easily measure such a thing?
It certainly doesn't sound easy, but, if I had to throw out, if there are other aspiring project managers out there, you could take the base Q from Project Noodle. So this would be planet Earth's next global natural catastrophe - cataclysm, and then subpen that with After Effects or something, and you may be able to get something meaty out of that to explore as for the project. But that would be an awful lot of work to do. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure of another secondary approach. You could qualify it further by maybe using a specific country for After Effects. After Effects on the United States of America or something like that, or After Effects on Canada. That may get something more specific rather than a global thing, and that's probably a better way to go if you have a certain preference for something that you're looking for, rather than a resolution of a global event.
Yeah, well, the thing that interests me is any scenario with a huge global disaster really has to get into the question of how will the authorities respond to such a thing. And McCanney's take is that if they saw a situation where solar kill shots or asteroids were likely to lead to total worldwide chaos, they would prefer to bring the whole system down on their own terms before it actually happened naturally. And that's kind of easy to imagine. And so one would then wonder, if you're targeting the solar kill shot next year, but the authorities decide to take everything down now instead, that just would add to the confusion and probably make the remote viewing a lot harder. Any thoughts on that?
That seems like a reasonable assumption. We have some amount of time, 2-3 days, by the time a coronal mass ejection comes off the sun and actually does hit Earth. And if they know that it's going to be at such a huge scale, we already know that they shut communication satellites down when those things are going to hit to keep them from being fried. So it's not much of an extrapolation to know if there was something really huge on its way, as far as the CME, that regulatory or governing bodies would preemptively pull the grid down in order to protect the grid, so it's not destroyed and operating when it does hit. It doesn't seem like too much of a stretch to me.
It's more than that, actually, Cosmo. Obviously, you're using remote viewing as a technique to gather information about the future, and I mean, it would seem logical that there would be other very talented remote viewers out there, and potentially the elite, the powers that be, would have access to these people. And I mean, with their amount of money and resources, potentially couldn't they know what's coming in the future by having, maybe hundreds of Ed Dames and hundreds of Joseph McMonagals remote viewing that we don't know about?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. If there were, a large, well-organized, and well-funded group could certainly take this a lot further than we've been able to. I mean, time is always a factor, and, we can't just do remote viewing 24 hours a day. So, as much as some of us would like to be able to do that, the funding's just not there. So that certainly would be possible to find out much more in depth about specific issues like you're talking about. But I don't know, until the funding comes around, I guess we'll have to leave that to secretive government agencies to pull off.
Well, they also might have, all kinds of satellites and whatever that could detect asteroids or something way before we would know.
Yeah, I certainly couldn't discount the possibility that the Department of Defense has an astronomical platform in space that we don't know about.
Well, anyway, it's pure speculation, but one wonders if we'll see more and more radical behavior by the powers that be in different countries.
That is an interesting point, and from a remote viewing standpoint, I just don't know. But I have been following Cliff High's webbot a little bit as of fairly recently, and his data gaps that he's suggesting seem to indicate that kind of a vacuum of governmental power during a specific time frame. So that would, I don't know. It is certainly very interesting, and I love getting the updates to see how his data, because his is collected in real time, how that turns out. So it's very interesting. I'm kind of a big fan of his data collection right now.
You actually see something happening.
We certainly can. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say that we see all kinds of massive underground building.
Where?
Worldwide.
Well, just to interject, there's the Chinese are building all these what they call ghost cities, and they're like very far into the interior. They're pretty much like an entire town with high-rise apartment buildings and stuff, but they're unpopulated. Nobody knows, like, was that just a giant, tax write-off for them, or what exactly was the purpose of that? And that would make an interesting remote viewing project to go, okay, we have a distinct real-world target. What was the purpose of it?
Yeah, that would be a very interesting project. I've heard differing accounts of, they have all this money coming in, and what do they do with it? Because they certainly don't want to dump it back into U.S. Treasuries, which I would agree maybe is not the most prudent investment if you're quantitative easing to infinity on it. And just the only other way to dispose of income like that is to build things. I know there is a lot of speculation in their real estate market, and most of these cities, people own them. Individuals own those apartments and condos in those buildings, and I believe the government is actually passing regulation to limit the number that an individual can can hold at any one time. So, on the surface, it's not like the government is strictly building these out in the middle of nowhere and, while no one lives there,
right.
There does seem to be individual ownership of elements of this rather than just, from a government top down. But I don't know for certain, and that absolutely would be an interesting project to run if we could figure out how to actually set it up.
Thanks, Kosmo. We are talking to remote viewing professional Kocmodpom on Time Monk Radio. Kocmodpom's website is kocmodpom.com. We'll be back after a short break. So we're back here on Time Monk Radio. Kocmodpom, have you got any last minute information or that you would like to discuss in regards to this object that you're tracking on the operation to be named later?
If I had to make a best guess for the current position, I would, and if you had a telescope, I would say the intersection between the orbit of Mercury and the radial would be, okay, so the vernal equinox being 0 degrees, so I would move off minus 90 degrees from the vernal equinox on the ecliptic plane, so back rather than in the counterclockwise, which generates from 0 up. So just looking in the reverse in the clockwise direction from the 0 about minus 90 degrees off of that. So and crossing Mercury's orbit. That would be my best estimate until we actually able to generate another data set on where it is or should be for the next 5-6 days. So
and from showing your latest data, it's coming close. I mean, I think it's 0.05 astronomical units. So it's not as close as the moon, but it's quite close. Correct?
Oh yeah, it's within. It's probably within an AU right now, 1 AU, 1 astronomical unit.
And just to summarize, you're not you don't have any data from the project itself that it's going to hit or any of its satellites is going to hit the Earth that you're aware of.
I do not at this point. Those would be additional projects of the effect, and like I said, I only have a singular data point on it, and I really can't draw any conclusions from it at this point. There have been, in past sections, targeting the object itself, some anomalous data points, and because there's so few and far between, I'm just not sure if they're accurate or not. But one viewer actually had a data point of mining that may have once gone on this object. But again, it's a singular data point, and we haven't been able to get confirmation from anyone else. So it could just be analytical overlay or imagination to the non-viewer. We just don't know. But
sure,
there's something odd about the object, but we just don't know what that is. And
also, that just in summary, the maximum length for people that might think that there's an effect on the Earth object from a distance, effect on action on a distance. The maximum length is roughly, based on your information, around 26, 27 kilometers and diameter around 13 kilometers. Correct?
Yep, roughly between 50 and 30 arrowhead shape is what we believe at this time.
Hi, this is Mash here. Question is, how do you think this relates to Ed Dame's kill shot? Could this possibly be something that it hits the sun, or maybe something from it breaks off and hits the sun, and that would cause a solar flare or something? Have you targeted anything like that?
Because of the orbital characteristics that I previously outlined, the perihelion, it shouldn't come any closer to the sun than roughly the orbit of Mercury.
Okay.
So, I don't know, maybe because it got so close, it is going to stimulate some sort of dragging effect off of the sun. I just don't know. Yeah, I will say it's really anomalous that you have these other data points in that initial killshot or Project Noodle data set that are showing more or less coronal mass ejection, and you have this object intertwined somehow. So you don't know what the purpose of it. Obviously I'm not suggesting that there is a purpose, but in the scenario of that global catastrophe, what part it plays in that, we don't know. We just know that it is coming up in that search as something valid related to this disaster.
Kosmo, I think we should consider that maybe Velikovsky was basically right, though. I mean, all the ancient legends talk about essentially comets that have wars in the sky and perhaps eventually turn into Venus, and unbelievable destruction when it hits. Maybe it destroyed Mars and maybe it damaged Earth tremendously. So I think the theory of essentially the effect at a distance is the issue. It's not simply that it would fall into the Earth. It's that the electrical charge, like a bug zapper, is the issue. The universe is electric. And maybe NASA and all those folks are trying to hide that from us. Now, I'm not saying this particular thing is going to turn into a planet. I'm just saying that the electrical charge, like a bug zapper, most people can't really imagine that that's what our solar system is it's one big electrical field. And
that very well could be.
And this
could cause a solar flare or any number of things, but a lightning strike that creates a new Grand Canyon or the big the cut on Mars, that kind of thing.
But this is the interesting thing for me, Plain, and for you, Kosmo, is that you using your search term of the next global catastrophe, you believe that this object is related somehow. So this is what I'm trying to also understand. As you mentioned, how is it related? Like, is it just a temporal marker? Is it something that, like an omen? This comet's the omen, and then the kill shot comes shortly after, or is this the cause and effect of the kill shot, or and also what's a time frame distance? I know it's very hard to say, but it must be relatively close for you, the remote viewers, to pick this up as a marker to the kill shot. Am I getting that wrong, or does that sound about right?
No, that sounds about right. It's definitely, because it's coming out of that search term of global catastrophe, and it's showing up there, it has to be related to it somehow. We don't exactly know, hence why we were trying to determine the effects on Earth of this specific object to see how it plays into the role of the other elements, being the solar effects. So I don't know. I don't know what part it plays, but it's in there. It's tied to it. So your guess that it is a temporal marker for the event, that could certainly be what it's there for. I don't know, but that seems like as good a explanation for why it's there, why something so small would be so important as to show up in this session work.
And the thing as well,
yes, I've heard.
The thing, Kosmo, is, did you hear Ed Dame's latest interview on Coast to Coast, by any chance?
I did hear it, yes.
Yeah, so he's now the assumption that it possibly could be ISON that will be the object. It's just again, this is the dichotomy in that your group has done this project, and you're picking up this asteroid, which is going to pass perigee to Earth around, well, it's going to come close to Earth around May 15th, 16th. ISON's not going to be coming close to Earth for at least several months. So, I mean, where it just, it doesn't, you know, obviously Ed Dames says it could happen any time. So could he be mistaken that it's ISON? It could be this object and the kill shot arrives sooner?
You know, I don't know, because I have seen other session work, blind session work from people that did draw something that looked comet-like, but I'm not exactly sure. So I certainly can't say whether or not he could be completely right that he may have delved further down into the rabbit hole of this of the kill shot and found another marker that he can use as a reference that we just haven't had the time to determine for ourselves. So I just don't know.
Have you done much research on the kill shot, Kosmo?
Well, this whole project is about the kill shot.
In terms of the effects on Earth, obviously you've got the long-term population projection, but do you have anything else in terms of? And obviously you've been doing work on sanctuaries with obviously everybody associated with Ed has. But have you done anything? Have you researched anything else in terms of the effects on Earth that maybe you can share?
I do actually do a lot of a fair amount of sanctuary contract work as well. So. It certainly is interesting, the locations of these that come out of these sessions. So I will say that there seems to be some discrepancy between that and an optimum residence location. Sometimes, not always. Sometimes they actually align and are the same place, which is very interesting, considering how isolated and desolate some of them are. Like mine in particular is only accessible by air. The nearest road is maybe 10 miles away, and there's certainly no power where it is. But in terms of sanctuary, it seems like an eminently very survivable location. Not sure how long that effect is supposed to last, but yeah, it is very interesting. I will definitely say that. So,
is there anything else that maybe that's not been made officially public that you might be aware of in terms of the kill shot? Like obviously everybody listening hopefully probably has watched Ed's video on the latest video on the kill shot, but is there anything in particular, like what the question I ask is the effects? Obviously, I believe Ed believes that the ozone layer will be disrupted, pretty much flattened by the kill shot, a series of solar flares. So that will cause radiation to come in on the Earth, but that would obviously mean there'll be lots of forest fires. I've also heard that Ed Dames believes that water will be scarce because of these solar flares. It will evaporate a lot of the water sources. Is there anything else that maybe hasn't been touched on in the radio interviews that you could maybe elaborate on further?
I don't think it would be fair to him for me to say anything that he may have told me in confidence on the subject. He may make another appearance with an update in the very near future. So I certainly don't want to expose any work that he's done on it that I hadn't had any direct participation in.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's fine. So in your gut, like when do you really think that you should? It'll be time. Like obviously they're doing a lot of these projects, but have you got anything like instinctively that you think when to look out for, or just playing it by ear?
Well, as soon as I get a little more information about the effects that this object is going to have, that's certainly going to change how I go about my daily life for the next 30, 45 days. But, one thing interesting is the timeline for the approach of this object seems to be consistent with the projected, I guess as Cliff High calls it, the global coastal event thing. It may just be coincidence that these two seem to be converging at the same time, but maybe there's something more to it. I don't know. That might be a good question for Cliff to see if he can find some kind of confirmation.
It's not just that
these two events are related.
Yeah, it's not just that, Cosmo. It's also that it's converging with the Far Sight project, which involved obviously the Hawaiian Remote Viewing Guild and the Glenn Wheaton and also Lynn Buchanan CRV team. I mean, they also saw something, but they saw something happening by June 1st. It's just interesting that they're all converging, at this period in time. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, my best guess. Granted, there's big error bars on either side of it would be Memorial Day. That'd be the target date. But again, that's working with data that's well over a month old now. So, the next data point would certainly lock that in to be very specific. But I just don't know. So there's certainly some swap in there. And because we don't directly know, maybe it is just a predecessor, a temporal marker, like you were saying, Jules.
What Mark from the forum just is asking, what can you expect to see or experience as a first sign of the phenomena, say of the kill shot? What's the first sign that you could expect? I mean, is it just that the flare appears, or is there signs before that?
That's one of the problems with remote viewing is, you can look at the effects on Earth, but unless there's something concrete that you can plant something more firm in there, you really kind of run into the magnitude problem about how big an effect is actually going to be. So I can't answer that. I just don't know.
Interesting. And so I guess in summary then, Kosmo, is what would you like to say to the audience in regards to just in summary of this project and in general the kill shot, and is any particular thing?
It just seems to be convergence of between this data set and Cliff's data set, and obviously the work Major James has done. So
so actually, one more thing that's just popped up. Are you aware of any other remote viewers that are taking action or doing things that do you think there's other remote viewers that see something coming and preparing or bugging out?
There are a number of other viewers that have relocated to their sanctuaries. Yes.
Oh, they've already done that, have they? They've already.
Yes.
Ah, interesting.
That is definitely happening now.
Quick question. Those other remote viewers, were they all people trained by Ed Dames, or were they from other disciplines, or?
I only know the ones from the Dames camp. The remote viewing world is really kind of fractured.
Yeah.
So I couldn't even tell you the relative sizes compared to the other groups. I just don't know that.
When you went through the training with Ed Dames, did you do it in person?
Oh, yes, of course.
Okay. Now, how much of his training did he covered the basic stuff, but how much did he go into things like the kill shot and esoteric targets and stuff like that? Did you run into those kinds of things during training?
Actually, yes. There was a, I'm going to say there was like a pro-level workshop a couple of years ago, back in 2010. And one of the targets that we were given was Earth year 2013. And we seem to definitely have work that was consistent with the killshot sequence. There was another target in the class 2. I don't recall exactly what the cue was, but it also seemed to point to it. So even then, it was clear that something was getting closer.
Right. And you also mentioned you did, when you said you did contract sanctuary work or looking for sanctuaries for people.
Yeah.
Will those people contact you individually, or was that through, like, subcontracting through Ed Dams or something, or what?
Usually that's a direct contact. Obviously, I always tend to defer that work towards the major, because that's really his baby. He's much more efficient at it than I am, because he's been at this a lot longer than I have. But if there's overflow or someone contacts me directly, then of course I do that work as well.
Okay.
But it's really secondary. So.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Mash. Thank you for your time tonight, Kosmodrome. Obviously, with May, with your data, which is another piece of the puzzle in regards to, obviously, with the far sight climate change completing by June 1st, and Cliff's global coastal event window and his remote viewing validation studies. May is going to be was an interesting time, and we really thank you for providing your information to us. So on behalf of Fox and all the members of Time Monk Radio and the WebBot Forum, thank you, Kosmodrome. Again, Kosmodrome's website is kocmodpom.com. In our tradition, may you and your family have many pies to come, Kosmodrome.